Hello and welcome to episode 6 of DealerPod, the podcast where we talk to motor trade industry experts nationwide to find out about their businesses and gain any insights that they may have to help you with your car sales operation. My name's Stephen. I'm joined today, as always, by Scott and Martin, and today's guest is the former Chief Executive of Benfield Motor Group, former Chief Operating Officer of Lucas, and current COO of Fleet Alliance. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Mr. Nigel McMinn. How are you doing, Nigel? You okay?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah. I think Mishi is a good name. That's quite cool. Let's go with that.
I'm just learning this presenter gig, you know. I'm a car dealer first and foremost.
Misha McMinn's got quite a nice ring about it.
So, Nigel, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself for our viewers who don't know who you are, your involvement in the motor trade, how you got started?
Yeah, crikey, that's quite a lot, Stephen, to start with. So, yeah, I'm 56 at Christmas. Don't rush to say the obvious, lads, but
Thought you were older.
yeah, 56. I feel it. I'm married with one kid whose little study I'm borrowing for this. I say he's a kid. He's 18 in 3 or 4 weeks' time, which seems to have flown by. And yeah, I've got a personal life, and we'll come back to that. So I'm interested in. We've just been talking a bit about Newcastle United. That'll switch some people off straight away. I keep myself fit. I've done quite a lot of triathlon, and I try and sort of stay active in the gym. We've got a dog, and so I'll start with the personal stuff.
Yeah.
And that's important because I think for the nearly 30 years I've been in the industry, for most of it, in truth, I lost sight of all of that. I think as anyone listening to this who's involved, particularly in the dealer side of the industry, recognizes that the dealerships are open 7 days a week. They're open long hours. Even when they're closed, the stats coming out of your ears, particularly in franchise world, because big groups tend to measure a lot, and then you've got the manufacturer input. So the metrics are constantly pinging into your phone, even when the dealerships are closed. And in truth, I think circa 25 years of my life just evaporated, being completely engrossed in the industry. And I wouldn't change that, by the way. I absolutely loved it. I think it's a brilliant industry. I know many people who've tried to escape and they hate it and they come back. There is something sort of magical and special about this industry. I regard it as a big village. Everybody becomes friends, even if technically they're competitors. So it's a wonderful business. I had no idea I was going to spend the rest of my life in it when I joined it, which was in 1996, the 1st of April. I did wonder if somebody at Reg Vardy was going to say, only joking. You haven't actually got the job. But no, I joined 1st of April 96 at Reg Vardy. And at the time, they had about 30 odd dealerships. So it was a small business, but it was growing quickly. And it was very highly regarded in the city, and there was a fantastic feeling about it. I mean, the analogy for football fans is slightly lost now, but at the time we all used to say, God, it's like working for the Man United of the motor industry. You wouldn't want to be working for the Man United of the motor industry just now, but it was fantastic. We were buying businesses, everything was on fire. Things could go down as well as up, but my goodness, there was a lot of talented people, and Sir Peter's vision, he wasn't Sir Peter at that time, but Peter's vision for the business was incredible, and his leadership was infectious. And we all felt like we were part of something. And I had 11 very happy years there. Tough years, demanding. It taught me the kind of principles of a work ethic, a true work ethic. But there were times I'd be in that office till 2 o'clock in the morning, preparing for a meeting the next day, and I never thought anything about it. It's just I loved what we did, and every day was a pleasure. But of course, it was bought by Pendragon in 2006. I think it was 2006, and I can sort of say it quite openly now because, Pendragon's been bought by somebody else and so much water's gone under the bridge. But they were bloody awful. I mean, they came in and they honestly couldn't tie our shoelaces. How on earth they had managed to buy us was totally beyond any of us. So we had people who, frankly, we wouldn't have employed as a sales manager, coming around and telling us that they were in charge of some big franchise division, and they cracked straight on with this big restructure, and the language was appalling, and we weren't totally pure at Reg Vardy, but there was a good ethic about the business. It was professional. And I can honestly say now that other than Trevor Finn, who I always thought was a gentleman and a smart guy, everybody else, I thought, this is just awful. So I was one of the first wave of people to leave, and I was out within 6 months of Pendragon taking over, and joined Benfield, a family-owned business based in Newcastle. I'd known the Squires family, part of this village, and I joined them as managing director. And in many respects, I regard the sort of 7 years that I had as Benfield as my sort of happiest time in the industry. Despite what I've just said about Vardy, Vardy was fantastic, but I got to take a lot of the good practices and the culture and the energy from Vardy into Benfield. And there were a lot of great people at Benfield already, and I brought quite a few ex-Vardy colleagues with me eventually to Benfield. And so I think Benfield sort of turned from a really lovely company with a great culture into one that was just a bit more dynamic, and we flew. It was a great period of my life. I mean, apart from the fact I had to work with Martin, most of it was just plain sailing.
Some good times though.
Yeah, there were some good times, but I mean, most of the interactions we had, Martin, were pretty tense and difficult, weren't they? I mean, so
yeah,
now. So yeah, we had a great time there, and and then I got tapped on the shoulder by my old pal, who again I'd known for many years, Andy Bruce, who by that point was on the cusp of being made chief exec at Lookers. And he said, "Come on, you need to come and play with the big boys now." And I genuinely didn't want to go. I was very happy where I was, but Andy's very persuasive and very amusing. And after a couple of fairly heavy drunken dinners with him, he persuaded me to go and meet some other colleagues. And then, as I spent 6 or 7 years at Lookers, and again probably tried to emulate what I had learnt and done at Vardy and Benfield, and tried to sort of turn Lookers into a big Benfield. That perhaps didn't go down too well with the sort of long-standing Lookers people, but it needed to happen. So I'm very proud of the time that I had at Lookers, and then now I find myself in a very different part of the industry, the fleet and leasing sector, which, although I had sort of always been responsible for fleet and leasing companies, lease brokers as part of these other groups, I'd had specific responsibility for that in most of those. So I thought I knew it. And, I'm in my 4th year now with Fleet Alliance, and I'm still learning every day. It's an incredibly complex, nuanced part of the sector, which, even if you think you know it, it takes a lot to get to know it. So yeah, but having a great time there. How's that for starters?
That's fine. Just moving back to when you did start at Reg Vardy, what role did you first start as? Were you a salesperson or?
No, it's something that I hid, like a sort of shameful, embarrassing, dirty secret, for many, many years, and I'm questioning myself as to why I did this, because I still feel a little bit of it now. But I'm afraid, painful though it is to admit, I'm a chartered accountant, and for some reason, so I joined Vardy as a financial analyst because I left essentially from Price Waterhouse, having qualified. And so a fantastic guy who I've worked with a couple of times since, Jed Murray, recruited me there. Still friends with Jed today, nearly 30 years later. But the role of financial analyst, Stephen, was really primarily, as it suggests, looking at all the numbers and trying to work out where improvements needed to be made. So virtually all of that was done for Peter Vardy and the MD at the time, Graham Potts. So most of my time, although I reported to Jed, most of my time was spent with Graham and Peter, and so yeah, I that's how my time there started. But you can imagine that you start to get to understand the way the business works pretty well, and there comes a point where you think, well, I'd quite like to actually have a go at doing it rather than just look at the numbers. And so, after about 3 years, I think it was, I jumped the fence and ran a dealership, and then never stopped running dealerships.
Yeah. So is that you've never actually worked in like a sort of on the sales floor or nothing like that? I've been a sales manager in a dealership. No.
No, but because of that, because of my background, I was always conscious of it. And in truth, I think it's the reason that I hid it, because
Yeah.
I wanted the lads on the floor to respect me, and I wanted them to know that I could go and do it.
Yeah.
And so actually, in truth, Stephen, I probably worked harder as a general manager and even all the roles that I did beyond that, franchise director, etc. Even as COO, I worked hard to try and always stay connected to the coalface. So I used to love it. If at Sunderland Nissan, if the sales manager and the business manager were away and I had to sit in the chair and actually
Yeah.
stack the deals and go and second face the
Yeah.
customers, or if I was just floating around on the floor, going picking people up out on the pitch and stuff, I used to love doing it because I felt I had a point to prove that I could.
Right.
And listen, I'm not pretending to be a brilliant salesperson, but I like people. I'm interested in them. I find it easy to talk to customers. I find it easy to listen to them. And then, so unlike my pal who lives 6 doors down, Mr. Forrester, who always on these sorts of things says, "Oh, well, I'm not very good with people, and I don't really like cars." You know, uh, I'm the absolute opposite. I love cars and I love people, and so I found the sales bit of it, pretty straightforward. And I would say I've sort of grown in confidence that, I've worked with so many salespeople over the years that I realized that you don't always have to have come from the floor to be good at it.
No, of course, without a shadow of doubt. The reason I mentioned it was just I think a lot of our audience will be from that kind of side of the business,
Yeah.
So it'll just be good to get some insights from someone who never started there but managed to work their way up.
Yeah, what I would say is, and I think they'd be surprised at this, is that those of us who didn't come from the sales floor always wish we did. And
Right.
so we always regard that they've got a much bigger advantage over us because they started that way and worked their way up. And the great thing, one of the magic things about this industry is it doesn't matter where you started. You can come in, from any direction. I've seen people be successful, from any background, after sales, fleet, sales, accountancy, almost any direction, and they can be successful. You don't need to have a certain pathway or a certain set of qualifications. And I think that we're quite unique in this industry with that, that you don't need to have followed a certain pattern. You can do it from anywhere.
Mm-hmm. So the
I mean,
role that you
if Martin's done all right, everyone can, let's face it.
I remember a little one at Benfield though, when I'm sure you and Steve Bainbridge went to was it Gateshead Nissan and spent a weekend selling cars. I remember. I was saying that so many moons ago, but I do remember that.
Yeah, well, we used to do it we used to try and do a different dealership every month, Martin.
Yeah.
So you might remember God rest his soul, the legend Dax Pierce, who I'd worked with at Vardy, and I brought him up from Manchester to run Benfield's Alfa Romeo dealership. He knew more about Alfa Romeo than anybody at Alfa Romeo, and of course he used to win everything. Do you remember him, Martin?
Yeah, yes, I do remember Dax. Yeah, very, very well.
He was a machine. He'd work 7 days a week, 15 hours a day. Scott's sitting there thinking, well, that's what I do every week.
Yeah. I'll take part-time. That's part-time hours.
You don't know the real Scott Simeon, do you?
But yeah, Dax was a machine, and so he won everything, every sort of incentive trip. And there was one that I can't remember. I think it was Morocco or something. He really wanted to go on it. And he said, "But what am I going to do? How's the dealership going to function if I'm away for 4 days on this trip?" And I said, "Me and Steve will come and do it." And he was like, "What? You and Steve will come and run the dealership for 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday?" I said, "Yeah." "What? You'll work all 4 days?" I was saying, "Yeah." So Steve and I took great delight in doing more deals those 4 days than he'd done in the previous week on those 4 days.
There was two of you, though.
There were two of us, yeah. Yeah, it took 2 people to replace Dax, let me tell you.
Oh, right, really? He's that
Yeah,
good?
he was honestly very,
It was,
very,
it
very
was
good.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. This is how his brain worked. I remember being in that dealership with him one day, and this Alpha, I think it was a 166. Was the 166 the sort of longer saloon one? Do you remember the 156 was the sort of mid-sized saloon? I'm sure the 166 was the longer one. And this silver 166 pulled in, and it had a private plate on it. And he went, "Oh, that's a bonny thing. Look at that." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, nice car that." Anyway, customer walks in, and Dax says, "Just excuse me a sec." He says, "Hi there." He says, "I'm just admiring your car. Lovely, those 166s." And he said, yeah, no, it's a nice car." He said, "You've got a private plate on it." He said, "Can I just ask you?" He said, "You never had water leaks on this car, did you?" And the customer said, "Oh, I have actually, yeah. I've had quite a few problems with water leaks." He said, "You don't remember what the number plate was before you put your private plate on?" He said, "Vaguely." He said, "It wasn't, I can't remember what it would be.
Yeah.
DE04 ABC." And the customer says, "It was, yeah. That's exactly what it was." He says, "I sold that car new." He said, "I had to get bought back off the first customer because it kept leaking." And he said, then the second customer bought it, and they brought it back into a compound, and they changed this, that, and the other. And he said, "I knew it would never stop leaking." He said, "I knew it was that car. There's hardly any of them in silver."
Wow.
He knew the specific car. He was incredible. You've never met a guy like it.
What's he up to now, then?
Well, very sadly, he died about.
Oh, right.
Would it be about 8 years ago, something like that, Martin?
Yeah, something like that now.
Yeah, he very sadly, in his 40s, had a brain tumor, and they thought he'd fixed it, and no, they hadn't, and it came back again, and sadly it killed him. So yeah, he's but he lives on, as you can tell. Anyone who knew Dax Pierce will remember him.
Yeah, 100%.
Nice to hear, isn't it? So, Nigel, your company that you're involved with now, Fleet Alliance, is that your company? Obviously, I know you're chief operating officer, but do you have a stake in the company?
Well, it's very topical. You should ask. We did join it with the view of changing the investment in the background so that we would have a stake in it. But you're probably aware that the fleet and leasing sector is like the inverse of the dealerships with retail. So when retail is absolutely on fire and they can sell every vehicle they've got, like we've had for a couple of years post Ukraine, then actually fleet and leasing, get starved of vehicles. Well, because the manufacturers can sell everything at full up list price. And you'll remember at that time they were jacking up list prices, discounts had all been removed. They couldn't supply enough cars to retail dealerships. So fleet and leasing sector got sort of choked out in the cold. And so consequently, as a fleet and leasing business, all of our numbers, we were still taking orders, but they were just going into an order bank and they were never coming back out. And so our numbers were going down, and we couldn't affect the change in investment. The external investors got a bit spooked by the whole thing. So we're actually just back on with that now. But yeah, it's a lovely business. Very, very, very different business model to car dealerships.
And how big is the business then? How many staff do you have at the moment?
Yeah, it's small, and small is beautiful in my
Yeah,
view. It's about 100 staff. Um,
small. Sorry.
well,
See, this is the difference, Nigel. This is the difference.
No.
Obviously, you're used to like hundreds or even thousands of employees.
well,
Obviously,
yeah,
and,
that's
and a bit
exactly
of a
it,
difference in a bit of a difference from independent world to main dealer, and then obviously Fleet Alliance.
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah,
Scale.
I didn't mean that to be,
No,
disrespectful, but
no,
of course I've
no,
come
no.
from a job where at the time we left there was something like 9,000 people.
Yeah.
So who one way or another effectively all reported to me. So to go to a business with 100 people,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Nice, yeah.
and I'm sure I've said before to Martin, anyone who asks about it, I always say my favorite job was general manager. I always look because you could make decisions today as a team, and stuff would start happening, hopefully for the better, by tomorrow. And if it wasn't working, you could get back together with whichever members of the team, and we'd all figure it out. Why is that not quite working? Well, customers aren't reacting too well with that. Well, let's change it again. You're so close to the coal face that you could really make changes. I mean, particularly in a business like yours, you don't even have the franchise, kind of drag on you where that stops you from doing stuff.
Mhm.
And of course, I'm now for the first time in my career finding myself in a non-franchise business like yours where we can make decisions and tomorrow it gets better.
Mhm.
And so it's really, really enjoyable. But yeah, it's 100 people who are very, very experienced. We've got the business is about 25 years old, but we have an enormous amount of people with 15 and 20 years service. And in a sector like fleet, where the expertise and frankly the sophistication of the way, particularly the big fleet buyers, um, the way they want to manage fleets and look at risk and cost in every single, everything's about whole life costs for a start. So you think it's about lease costs, but that's just part of it. They want whole life costs. If you haven't got that expertise embedded in the business all the way through, then I think you'd find that sector really hard.
Mhm.
So do you find,
I realized without being disrespectful that actually I knew nothing. Dealers really know nothing about that kind of managed fleet sector.
No,
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you.
Mm.
When we're prepping for this podcast, I was speaking to Martin and Scott, and they were both saying that yourself was well known in the industry, and pulled me hand up. I didn't know who you were, Nigel, and I knew even less about leasing and fleet. So treat me as a monkey, to be honest with you. Could you maybe explain it in a little more bit detail? Maybe what your day to day is, and how
Yes.
the business operates.
Absolutely, you don't know how much. And by the way, Stephen, I've only just worked out who I am in the last few years.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
So don't feel bad about it. Yeah, so the business, one of the reasons we were really attracted to it is it occupies a unique position in the motor industry. It's a kind of very underserved part of the whole sort of automotive landscape. So in fleet and leasing, what you tend to have is generally you've got very large leasing companies and
Yeah.
some manufacturers who want to service the top slice of the largest companies. So, your sort of Network Rail and, Virgin Broadband, companies that'll buy thousands and thousands of BT, thousands of vans or cars, and of course they want to have relationships with those companies because they buy so many.
Yeah.
But even with the large lease companies, as soon as you get down to a fleet of below 100, which in my book, if you're a company running 100 cars, you're a pretty meaningful company.
Yeah.
But lease companies generally aren't that interested if it goes much below 100 and certainly below 50. They're not really that bothered about it. And so dealers, as I say, are interested really in supply. And of course, by nature, dealers tend to be focused about the franchise, silo that they're in. Whereas, of course, you take a typical SME customer with, let's say, 50 cars on the fleet. Well, and it might be 10 vans and 40 cars, and it might be half a dozen, BMW, Mercedes, something like that for the senior people, and then it might be 2 or 3 different grades of cars for everyone else. They don't want, really, generally, they don't want a sole supply with one manufacturer,
Yeah.
or even one funder, but they're still quite sophisticated buyers. They've got a lot of vehicles to manage, but typically what you'll find is that they don't have a full-time fleet manager. It'll be a finance director or a HR director or something that's managing the fleet on the side.
Yeah.
And they've got relationships with some dealers, some lease companies, but they're having to pull it all together. Drivers are ringing them every day saying, I've got a puncture, or my car's got a warning light on, or, that sort of thing. So that person who's responsible for the fleet normally sees it as a massive inconvenience, because they've got a day job to do.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do that makes Fleet Alliance unique is that we specialize in that small to medium size range.
Mm-hmm.
We leave the big stuff generally to the big boys, but we focus our efforts on fleets up to 100. And we have our own piece of software that we use to manage fleets called eFleet. The drivers get an app on their phone, and the companies, we give that for free to those companies who put their business through us.
Right.
And so it allows them to manage the fleet. And the system firstly takes the noise away, because the drivers can do everything themselves. If they've got a puncture or need a service, it tells them, they just literally press something on the app and it dials straight through to who they need to sort it out. So they don't need to ring the finance director anymore. And the finance director gets reports every day that say, right, you need to go and tax that one in the next few days, and you need to reinsure that one. Oh, and this one's up for renewal in 6 months' time. You better have a look at that. And so our system just takes the noise away. And because we're not directly a funder, we broker everything to the top 12 leasing companies. So we always get them the best prices in the market. And to be large enough to manage fleets and have software to help companies manage their own fleets, but be independent and a broker is quite rare. There isn't really anyone else who's doing that. I should say at the top end, we do have some very big customers. So we do the likes of McDonald's for the whole of the UK, Nobia, who you'd know as Magnet,
All right.
Kitchens. We do Entain, which is Gala Coral. So I mean, we do some they outsource everything to us. We manage the whole fleet for them.
Right.
Have you came across Herd Hire, Nigel?
I haven't, Scott. No.
We got involved with that about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and we bought into franchise, and they're based down south, and it's mainly van hire, or like they would do a lease for maybe somebody with bad credit. If you couldn't get a van and you're a new business startup, or somebody might need 4 or 5 vans, but it was I would think it would probably the really lower end of the market, like a very small kind of a thing. So they had various franchises all over the country, and they had like the Herd Hire app where, if there was a van off the road, they could go to, they're all connected to the main dealers. And so it was a good system. But in the Northeast where we are, we tried doing the van hire, and just even on, like brand new vans, putting them out for like 50 quid a day, and the phone wasn't ringing. We did all the advertising. We struggled. But as a sidearm to that, we could get a van for somebody on like a 3-year lease direct, where we could maintain it and so on. But we brought that in, but we struggled with it, and I pulled the plug on it eventually.
Yeah, they're all very specialist markets. We don't do the daily rental stuff. We do offer it. We have to offer that as a service to the outsourced, the bigger clients.
Mm-hmm.
We do it through somebody else. We don't attempt to do it. It's a highly competitive market, and daily rental or hire is very different again to lease. There was a lot of stuff talked about subscription, a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You don't tend to hear it anymore. The reality is that subscription has to come at a cost. For anyone owning that asset, where you can't guarantee it's going to be out through all of its life, then the only way you can cover the risk of someone handing it back is by charging a lot more per month. And the reality is that, there is a market for people in interim positions and that sort of thing to take those vehicles, but there doesn't appear to be a mass market. Well, but at one time, if you remember, not that long ago, everybody was saying, well, all cars are going to drive themselves. Everybody will pay for them just on some sort of flexible subscription plan. So you'll never own one. You'll just sort of call it up and it'll magically appear outside your front door, like an Uber style. That's how it'll be mobility. And it's funny. I mean, I found myself as I've got older thinking, wow, maybe I'm just a dinosaur now. Maybe I just don't get all of this stuff, but I can't see it happening.
Well, I like Elon a lot, and I think Elon might make that happen eventually.
Yeah.
And maybe fly you to Mars afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if anyone's going to do it, Stephen, you wouldn't put it past him. I mean, you have to take your hat off to him. He achieves things with SpaceX. How the hell he runs SpaceX?
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Tesla, the boring company. I mean, seems to be, and every one of them seems to do something special. So you have to take your hat off to him. Personally, I don't think we won't see that model of nobody owns a car. They just call it up and it drives itself to your front door, and you just pay an amount for that. And I can't see that happening in our lifetime, but maybe I'm a dinosaur.
Not in our lifetime, yeah.
Which is a good thing, I think. It's a good thing.
How do you see the the government's push for getting everything electric for 2035 or 2030? They keep changing the boundaries. How do you think that is going to change people's decision making, or from a business point of view, and also personal points?
Yeah, well, I think it's a train that's left the station, Martin. So we are going to go electric, whether people want to resist it or deny it.
I mean, I drive electric.
Yeah. Well, so do I. I've done since the whole time I've been at Fleet Alliance, and I love it. I wouldn't go back. And I was somebody who loved the sound of a big growling petrol engine, but I don't miss it. But the reality is, whether you like it or not, whether you think that that the infrastructure's not there or the range isn't good enough, it'll all get better, and it is getting better. And I'm afraid it's just an inevitability that by 2030 or 2035, I can't see them backing off this ZEV mandate. I think it's just going to come in. And when you look at the billions and billions that the car manufacturers have had to plow into creating this technology, and they're now on a track to improving it and making it more mainstream and lower cost of production, then I think it's just inevitable. There's no way they're going to just suddenly do a handbrake turn and, we'll just do hydrogen next. I mean, there's too much money gone into electric. So I think it'll take another 10 years for it to become mainstream for all the new cars going on the roads. But the bit that nobody really talks about is that's only the new cars going on the road. There's something like 35 million cars on the road. It'll take at least another decade beyond that to wash through so that all cars on the road are electric. It'll be 2045, 2050, I think, by the time virtually every car's electric.
Yeah. Although saying that, like the way they're building used cars at the minute, it might not take them as long because they're not built to last now, are they?
No, they don't seem to hang around. No. You don't seem to see loads of 20-year-old cars kicking around, do you?
Oh, well, I'm on the front line. I run a small retail operation, and we're finding recently that we get a lot of comebacks, a lot more comebacks than we've ever had on cars breaking down. And they just you don't need a mechanic to fix them anymore. You need a mathematician with a computer. And and they're reading a booklet, right? Try part A. If part A does not work, try B, then go to C, and then before you know it, you spend £1,500 trying to repair a car and you're no further forward.
Yeah. I know you're. I mean, when I was growing up, I remember it being a pretty common sight for people down our street, including my dad, to have the bonnet open on the car and be tinkering around in the engine, and they change spark plugs and they change the oil. Seeing somebody changing their oil on a Sunday, wouldn't be a rare sight. I mean, you wouldn't dare, would you? Now you wouldn't. I wouldn't have a clue what to do. If you,
We used to get them Haynes manuals, didn't you?
yeah,
Was it a Haynes manual?
Haynes manual, yeah.
And people would read through
Mm.
them and fix their own cars, and that's just totally gone now. That
Yeah.
I wonder
yeah.
because
anyone fixing them now.
I wonder because the electric's coming in, that's putting people joining as mechanics, because obviously engines and it'll be changing the batteries if that's going to be not a bigger draw. For
It's a good
young
point.
ones coming in.
I don't know whether they, it could cause people might not fancy it if they're not tinkering with an engine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, you might argue that it opens it up to a more diverse group of people. So
Yeah.
traditionally it's been very male dominated, hasn't it? I mean, we worked very hard at Benfield and Lucas to softly change that from the ground up in after sales. But when a lot of it is heavy manual labor, lifting big heavy wheels or engines or whatever around, you can see it putting them off. So the inverse of your argument is it could attract a lot more women to the job if it's a slightly more technical, sort of challenge.
definitely.
Yeah.
Or zesty blokes like me.
You never know. You never know. What about when you were at Benfield? Did that group grow when you first moved over there, or did it still with the same amount of branches, or did you buy some in the early days?
Yeah, it did. It did grow. We did buy some dealerships, most notably the Colebrook and Burgess Audi dealerships, the four Audi dealerships, the two in Newcastle, one in Sunderland and Stockton.
Right.
But we also bought or opened, new dealerships here and there. We did also shut a couple of the smaller ones, like Hexham, you might remember. We used to have Hexham Volkswagen, and sadly, dealerships like that. There was another one in Otley Ford and Wetherby Ford. And sadly, the days of having those dealerships in lots of little small towns, are largely gone, and they cost so much to operate that you've got to try and squeeze as much business through one big city centre site to make the thing viable. So the rationale of closing a little one like Hexham was that you could keep half even of the sales and the gross profit, but lose all the cost. But put that half into Scotswood Road, then of course it makes Scotswood Road a load more successful. So I'm afraid that sort of constant decline in the number of dealerships. And I mean, do you remember when we were growing up? I'm saying I'm not looking at Martin. But when the rest of us slightly older ones were growing up, there would be a Ford dealership on just about every street corner. I think at one time there was something like 500 Ford dealerships. The reality is that most franchises now, I suspect, realize they can cover the UK through the major towns and the cities, with probably more like 80 or 100 dealerships. They don't need anything like 500.
It's interesting when it's interesting when you say that, Bob, because you see agency now coming into it, and obviously with the way Tesla don't have a dealer network. Polestar went down that route, but now Polestar's backing out and going back into the dealerships and saying, well, actually, we do need you. So it's a total different setup. But you're right in what you're saying. They can see it.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a lot of new ideas, some of which catch fire and some don't. To be truthful, Martin, I'm obviously 3 or 4 years out of it now. I don't really understand what the difference is between they use terms like hard agency or real agency and soft agency and that sort of thing. And I can't honestly, I presume it's something to do with whether you carry a target still or who owns the stock. I mean, I think agency at its core means the manufacturer invoices the customer direct.
Yeah.
But I suppose a full agency must mean that they, Polestar certainly at one time did own the stock and therefore the target. But whether they're finding that without targets, it just doesn't really work.
So you no longer dealing with manufacturers at all, then, or is it?
We deal with them, but we deal with them like a customer, to be honest, Martin. Now, so we'll say to them, look, we think we can shift, X many hundred or thousand of these for you. What's the terms? And if they're not good enough, then we say, oh well, your mates down the road are giving us a bigger discount, so maybe we'll steer customers towards those ones. So
Yeah.
we behave like a lease company or a big customer now.
Is it similar to the likes of Enterprise when they obviously bulk buy, these big car hire companies, or is it a total different model?
Yeah, well, it's similar. We don't take the risk on the vehicles, so we'll commit to volume, but hardly ever would we ever want to be in a position where we're actually buying vehicles. So it's usually like a forward commitment, Scott. We'll say we think we'll do 500 of those, and then we'll agree terms based on that, and then we just keep tracking it, and we just make sure we hit everything.
What happens if you don't hit that?
Well, in theory, they could force you to buy up the remainder.
Right, okay.
Yeah. But of course, like everything, Stephen, it's a negotiation. So you can play tunes on that, and
yeah, of course.
And we just try and make sure that we never commit to something that we can't easily achieve. So
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about obviously you deal mainly with like small to medium business sizes. Do you do anything with direct to consumer stuff or?
we do. It's a very small part of the business. So less than 10% of the volume that we do each year. So we have a direct to consumer business called Intelligent Car Leasing.
Right.
And that does the same sort of thing as nationwide vehicle contracts, select car leasing, leasing options. They're the three sort of established big boys in the sector. And then we're one of a number of smaller players. So yeah, we do fine with that, but it's just not the center of gravity. A small business with 25 or 30 vehicles on the fleet is really perfect. In fact, actually, to sort of illustrate the point, Lex are a sort of key business partner of ours through Lloyds Bank. Lex used to employ 80 odd people out on the roads, knocking on industrial estate, on the doors, seeing if they could get small businesses to go directly with Lex.
Yeah.
But I think for what they won, they found that the costs of the business development people was so much that they made them all redundant about 4 or 5 years ago. And they had a database of about 10,000 vehicles for those small customers with sub 30 on the fleet. And they just gave that to Fleet Alliance. And we now manage that on their behalf. And any lead that comes into Lex or Lloyds Bank from their bank managers, sub 30, doesn't go to Lex anymore. It comes straight to us.
Right. Okay. And
So it
how
sort of
you
illustrates the point. They're not bothered about that small stuff. They're better leaving it to a specialist.
And how are you guys generating new business, Nigel? Sorry.
Well, obviously that Lex partnership gives us a constant, steady stream. There are something like 600 relationship managers that work for Lloyds Bank, and so any one of those who gets a customer that says, I need to sort out some leasing, as I say, they refer them directly to us. But we do have a team of 5. It's about to go to 7 of new business development people who are from data and LinkedIn Navigator and their own experience generating prospects for us. And we also have started last year for the first time doing some sort of marketing on Google and social media for Fleet Alliance, for corporates, particularly around salary sacrifice. Actually, that's the kind of hot growing market. So most of our new corporates that come to us are coming to us for salary sacrifice, and then usually they say to us, "Well, can't you do the fleet as well?"
Yeah, Octopus are advertising heavily for that as well, aren't they?
They are. Yes, they're probably our biggest competitor because they're
Right.
so active in the SME space.
Yeah, one of my staffs just took a car on salary sacrifice for Octopus, a Tesla.
Yes.
So I got involved in it a little bit, and it wasn't really explained very well by them. Like, they didn't really do a good job of it. I had to go like sort of seeking them out for assurances of what actually happens and how the salary sacrifice works and how it gets paid. It wasn't a slick operation what they done. Like,
Yeah, well, you're crossing them over for me to nod them in here because that's exactly
there you
how
go.
we pitch to customers. We say if you go with Octopus or one or two other companies like that, the established salary sacrifice players. So Tusker and Zenith, I'm meaning. you'll get essentially a portal,
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
and
Yeah,
your drivers are left to just sort of figure it out from the portal. Whereas we have a portal, and they can play around on that, and they can even order on it. But we give them a scheme advisor who actually they sit in the same team as the intelligent car leasing, because essentially they're retail customers.
yeah,
And so we give a person to all of the drivers to access, because quite often they're attracted by the tax savings,
yeah,
but they don't know that much about, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or range anxiety, or which car's better, what does this kilowatt battery mean compared to that one. And so they need a lot of hand holding. And so we seem to do very well with it. We get higher penetration than those other companies because we put
Mm.
people in the middle of it.
yeah, yeah. It was more from like the actual business point of view. He came to me and he says, "Oh, I want to do this salary sacrifice thing," and I says, "Oh yeah, what's this?" And he explained a little bit about it, and then he says, "Oh, I'll just sort it. I'll sort it." And I was like, "All right, yeah, just sort it and let us know what I need to do." And then all of a sudden, I got a contract in an email, and I was like, "Well, what's this?" Nobody
Yeah.
from the actual companies told me what salary, because I didn't know what salary sacrifice is and what it
Uh-huh.
entailed and the accountant behind it, and so
Yeah.
I had to, because obviously he's a highly regarded member of my staff, and like I said before, I've only got a small team. I went out my way to make sure that I done it for him, and I knew what I was doing, but they give us no help, mind, no help at all.
No.
Even when
Well, what we would do in the same circumstances, we do get drivers who inquire because
Yeah.
they like the look of the savings. And if it's a driver, we always say, well, look, you need to give us the details of your boss, whoever's going to
Yeah.
actually put this in place for the company, and then we'll properly pitch and explain things, because the company is the one that's got to put the scheme in for the
Yeah.
drivers to get access to it. So if you miss that step out, then it's it's pointless.
Well, I don't know if that was a one-off, but Octopus are definitely dropping the ball on it.
Yeah, well, it's so big now, that I mean, I think they've got something like 800,000 or 1 million drivers with access to their portal.
Wow.
Wow,
So it's a very big business.
I can well imagine.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But you'd be mad to take it. If your employer will do it, you'd be mad not to take it on salary sacrifice.
yeah, definitely.
You're getting all that tax back through a benefit in kind that's so low. So why on earth would you go and personally lease one?
Mhm.
Yeah,
We have somebody on the salary sacrifice on there. They just got a brand new electric car. Who I was talking
Yeah.
about before.
Yes, and it's obviously so suited to electric
Yeah.
because of the benefit in kind. That's where the really big savings are.
Mhm.
I mean, if you're in that magic bracket between £100,000 a year salary and 150,000, where effectively you lose your personal allowance for every pound over £100,000, then you're on a marginal rate of tax between those two figures of 60%. Plus some VAT savings. So I mean, you'd be mad not to take it on salary sacrifice.
Mhm.
hmm yeah,
So what's the plans for the future, Nigel?
Well, I mean, this ZEV mandate is very helpful for us. It creates a sort of tailwind for the business, and now cars are back in full supply. As long as the benefit in kind stays quite low, then for company cars or salary sacrifice, then we've got a very big market to go at. So you'll see that the industry is struggling to hit the 22% requirement for battery electric vehicles this year. But if I tell you that we're at something like 48% pure battery electric as a percentage of our order take so far this year,
Big.
wow,
and we're at 70% if you include low emission plug-in hybrids. So our home game is this low benefit in kind stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, we're putting a lot more energy and effort and spend into marketing, business development, just to grow the company organically through that. And as I say, the market's easily there to support it. So we've got a good foundation to build on. So yeah, it's a good business, and hopefully, if we can get the external investment thing into place as well, then
Mhm.
it'd be nice to have a little share of it as well.
Mhm.
yeah, definitely. In our businesses, obviously we're regulated sort of heavily by the FCA, We do a lot of finance, and obviously what you're talking about, it's all finance. Is there any sort of regulatory challenges that you've got in like a fleet management business that's maybe a bit different from a dealer retailing a car?
Yeah, well, we're regulated as well. So, we're FCA approved. And you can imagine after the FCA investigation that took place at Lookers, we didn't take that for granted, albeit, all puffed itself out and the company wasn't found to have done anything wrong. So yeah, well, Andy and I went down to London and got our FCA approval. And so it all relates for us in that tiny 10% proportion that's intelligent car leasing. 90% of what we do is to small limited companies that's non-regulated.
Right. I see.
So we're essentially a non-regulated business, but we've
Yeah.
taken the final step of getting the FCA accreditation.
Mhm.
But the big issue, to answer your question, for our sector is the same one that's facing the retail sector, which is about disclosure of commissions,
Yeah.
and the whole sort of calculation of commissions on the discretionary commission model.
Yeah. And do you think that's going to affect you that much?
Well, it won't affect Fleet Alliance much because it's such a tiny proportion of the business, and
Yeah.
leasing still currently is out of scope
Right. I know that.
for regulation. It's just PCP, but we inevitably think it will come into scope. But we're pretty comfortable with it, to be honest, Stephen, because it's a small part of our business, and we largely work on fixed commissions and have done for quite some time. So,
Yeah.
we
I
don't
don't.
think there's going to be a huge redress.
I don't think there's any problem with it, me. I think it's like, I mean, mortgages have had it for years, haven't they? You expect someone who's doing a service for you, you expect that they're going to get paid. It's, like, all right, so that's what you're earning. Okay, fair enough,
Yes,
Um,
yes. There's some technicalities. The two sort of test cases that through the Financial Ombudsman Service, it's not cut and dried as to whether that sort of set a precedent. And so I think there's quite a lot of challenge from the sector. But as I say, we're kind of largely removed from all of that. So, I'm aware of it and I read it with interest. And I think the sector, the lenders, the dealers, there will be some redress on this, but I mean, who's to say what that actually looks like? I think, what tends to happen is those people, particularly on the public markets, I mean, there are hardly any public companies left now. I think it's only Virtue. But they tend to massively overreact to these things and assume the worst.
yeah,
And so certainly in the case of Lookers, you say you've got an FCA investigation, but you can't say what it's about or how likely it is that nothing's going to be found. But they just pan the thing and, hundreds of millions get wiped off the share price just in case. And so they overreact and then they correct themselves. And I have a feeling that this whole thing, Martin Lewis goes on the television, everybody panics. But I suspect it probably won't be as bad in reality as some people are saying.
me neither. Me neither. Nigel, I think there'll be a huge part of our audience who either have worked inside a main dealer operation or are still working inside a main dealer operation. Can you give them any advice if they want to move up the corporate ladder? What would be your advice for that?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I don't think in many respects, it has changed from when we were sort of young and trying to build a career, in that ultimately, for all the sophistication, for all the sort of, the information that customers have got at their fingertips through websites, and for all the talk of electric autonomous vehicles on subscription, there's a lot of very clever stuff gets talked about, but at its core, my view is customers will still want to deal with real people. And I think as long as you recognize, customers have been empowered for, a decade or more with lots of information, so that, that they're smart, as long as you genuinely help them buy the thing that's right for them and you listen to them and don't talk over them, if they come as a couple, you treat them both with respect, and you get back to them quickly. You honor your promises. If you say you're going to give them a certain bit of information or a document by a certain day, you do it. And I know it sounds like Jack and Jill, but I have to tell you that since I've left the sort of mainstream dealer world and I interact as a customer, it's frightening how bad the service can be. And quite often these are with people I've worked with, and I know, and I consider them to be friends, and they're still pretty awful at all that kind of basic stuff. So I would say, the kind of basic principles of remember that ultimately behind all this sophistication are two people, who are trying to work together to get the right car on the right sort of deal. If you do that consistently and work hard and be your own person, then I think the world's your oyster in this industry. I think you don't need to do an awful lot more than that. It just there's such a wide range of models and so much detail behind what each of the cars does that to get that expertise takes quite a lot of effort. You can't just go on one training course. And so I think, I'm sorry it's a bit basic, but hard work and being nice to people probably still is right at the heart of it.
Yeah, I think that's perfect, really. Yeah, and I think we'll end it there. Nigel, thank you very much for your time. You've been great. Really
That was a
appreciate it.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
Lovely.
Thank you for
Thanks,
making it
Nigel.
everyone. Thanks a lot, Nigel. Thanks.
All right, all the best.